6% commissions are gone. Sellers don't have to pay commissions anymore. It's completely free to sell your property. This information, which you may be seeing in the media, couldn't be further from the truth. And I'm here to debunk it, help explain and understand the NAR settlements, the changes that are coming here in August of 2024, and how it's going to affect realtors, how it's going to affect real estate agents, how it's going to affect buyers, and how it's going to affect sellers, so that you fully understand, depending on which field you're in, how it's going to affect you. So stick around to get all the details. See you on the other side. All right, guys, like I mentioned in this video, we are going to cover the NAR settlement. If you've been living under a rock, maybe you haven't heard about this, but you've probably been seeing lots of media, lots of different articles talking about 6% commissions are gone. No longer will you have to pay commissions for sell real estate. All of this information is completely incorrect, and you really need to look at the black and white and look at the fine print to understand this. And that's why I'm making this video. So if you're a real estate agent, if you're a buyer, if you're a seller, you understand what the repercussions will be, what the pros and cons of it are, and fully understand what is about to happen. So let's jump into it. But before we do, let me quickly introduce myself if this is your first time here. My name is Patrick Longley. I'm a licensed real estate agent out here in Oahu, Hawaii, and been helping buyers, sellers, and investors with their real estate needs. If you have any questions about the settlement, real estate in general, feel free to reach out to me. Got my contact information right here, or you can directly DM me on any of my social media platforms. Okay, so let's jump into this. We're gonna try to break it down and simplify it as easy as possible. But let's first start with how a general real estate transaction has been working. So generally how a real estate transaction works is that if you're a seller and you're going to sell the property, you hire a listing agent. Now you don't always have to. You could always sell it yourself, just as you can represent yourself in divorce court. It's generally in your best interest to hire a professional, but I'll leave that to your discretion. With that being said, they would hire a listing agent where they would sit down with their seller and they would discuss what they would sell the property at, what the timelines are, and more importantly, what the professional fee, compensation, or commission structure would be. And that is a big piece of selling your home. Now, how it would generally work is that they would agree upon a price, which has always been negotiable, whether that would be 5% or 6%, which was generally the industry standard. If they listed it and agreed upon 5%, that 5% would essentially be split between the listing agent and the buyer's agent. So if it was 5%, it usually would be 2.5, or whatever the structure was. And in that situation, generally the seller essentially was paying for the listing agent's commission and the buyer's agent's commission. The buyer themselves was not paying the commission to the buyer's agent. So this is how it's worked in the past. Additionally, when a buyer's agent was scouring the internet for their clients for a property, they could see in the MLS a little part that would explain what that co-op or that commission payout would be for the buyer's agent. Again, it could be $1, it could be 2.5%, 3%, 2%, whatever the pre-negotiated agreed upon amount was between the seller and the listing agent. So that was out to the public. It was out to us agents or buyer's agents to see, so they would see what the compensation would be. So that is how it has worked in the past and how it's still working now until August of 2024, where there will be some changes. Now, the second thing I want to go over is the NAR settlement and why it was even come into place. The NAR settlement was essentially a class action suit between a bunch of angry sellers, and they sued NAR, the National Association of Realtors, for basically conspiring to inflate commissions. They basically thought that it was unfair that they had to pay the listing agent and pay the buyer's agent. They didn't understand why they have to pay both agents. And I can understand from a certain standpoint why that would be confusing, but there can be ramifications if you change this, which we will probably see in the near future. Now, I'll reserve my opinion till the end, but that is a quick summary of what the argument or what the NAR settlement was about. So that is what has been put into place and actually has been passed, and it just needs to be signed by a judge, and most likely will go into effect August of 2024. Now, after the NAR settlement, what are the actual changes that are being put in place? Well, I'll be the first to say and debunk that the commission structure of 5%, 6%, those are not going away. Those have always been negotiable, and you can always negotiate that with your listing agent. And what you want to pay out to the buyer's agent, if anything, has always been negotiable as well. So I don't really understand why the NAR settlement was put into place, because those have always been in place, but again, I'll reserve my opinion on that. But what are the actual changes that are going to be put in place? Well, there's only really two major changes that are happening after this. It's not the removal of commissions. The first one is that MLS payout or the co-op commission payout is actually going to disappear as a field on the MLS. So if I'm a buyer's agent and I want to show a property to my client, I can't see what the payout is. Now this can be a bit of a challenge because number one, that will basically leave us to have to call the listing agent, and the listing agent's phone is going to be blowing up because the buyer's agent doesn't want to work for free. And they want to know, is the seller going to pay me, the buyer's agent, for bringing this buyer? And the second issue that arises is that if it doesn't show me what the payout is, if the seller is not going to pay the buyer's agent, then the buyer has to pay the buyer's agent, because buyer's agents aren't going to work for free. They're not going to drive around, show property, analyze properties, run comps, run paperwork for free. So that would have to be discussed prior to putting in an offer or negotiated while putting together that offer. So really what that just did is it complicated the whole process a lot more. It slowed down the process a lot more because there's going to have to be a lot more phone calls. And lastly, it's actually going to, I think, potentially bring up more litigation for fair housing, because there's a couple of people who might be out in the cold if they don't show what the payout is. The first thing is that if I call a listing agent and I say, hey, what is the seller willing to compensate? They could tell me one thing and then tell somebody else another thing if I tell them a little bit about my buyers, and maybe they're racist, or maybe they don't want to sell to an older family or a younger family, and they might just change what the compensation payout is based on the information that I give them. The second big change is that if you want to go work with an agent and go look at properties, you, the buyer, are going to have to sign a buyer's rep agreement. And you will not be able to actually see a property with an agent unless you do have a signed and executed buyer's rep agreement. Now, in that buyer's rep agreement, it will actually spell out what the compensation fee is or professional fee for that buyer's agent to assist you. And if the seller's not willing to pay it, you are basically gonna have to sign a document saying, I will pay the difference, or I will pay your entire professional fee if the seller is not willing to pay it. Now, I don't think this is the worst thing for agents, but I don't think it's very beneficial for buyers, and I'll explain really quickly. For agents, it's not the worst thing because I don't have to worry about whether somebody's going to switch on me and say, hey, I'm gonna work with you. I show them a bunch of properties and then they change their mind and say, hey, my sister just got licensed. I'm gonna work with her. She's gonna get paid, not you, even though you just spent hours, days, months analyzing properties, showing us properties, driving us around. So I'm not that upset about that. It is what it is. But I do think it makes it, once again, more difficult for buyers. If they want to go look at a property, they have to sign an agreement with maybe an agent they just met, and they don't even know if they're a valuable agent. They don't know if they actually know their stuff. And then you're already agreeing upon paying them if you find a property you like. I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's important to work with somebody that you trust, somebody that you value. And sometimes it takes time to understand whether that's a good agent or not. You can't really figure that out on a first call. Sometimes you want to go look at properties with them, see how knowledgeable they are, see how helpful they are before you sign any buyer's rep agreement and agreeing to pay them if they find you the property that you like. Okay, so those are the two big changes. Now let's get a better understanding of how this is going to affect buyers, sellers, realtors, and the general market. Okay, for buyers, let's talk about you guys, because this is really gonna affect you guys, is that it's really difficult already to buy a house, especially out here in Hawaii with the prices. And it's difficult for a buyer for a couple different reasons. Number one, there's not a lot of inventory, but more importantly, buyers have to show up with the down payment, whether that's gonna be, zero if you're VA, but usually it's gonna be 3.5%, 5%, 10%, or even 20% if it's an investment property. Then they have to pay closing costs. And now potentially, if the seller's not willing to pay the buyer's agent, they would also have to pay a professional fee, which could be $1,000, $10,000, 2.5% of the purchase price, whatever is negotiated. But that's another big chunk of change that has to be brought to the table by the buyer. And additionally, as guidelines stand now, you cannot finance, unless you're creative, and I have a couple different ways we could do it, but generally you cannot finance the buyer's agent's commission through the lender. Now that might change, we'll see, and there's creative ways around it where you still can, but that's for another video and for another conversation. The second big change that's happened for you buyers is if you wanna go look at a property, you may be forced to sign a buyer's rep agreement with someone that you don't even know that they have value, and not sure if you actually want to work with them. But just because you want to see that property, you need to sign a buyer's rep agreement. Now there's going to be a lot of different documents coming out, maybe different hybrid agreements where it's like, hey, I'm signing this, but only for this home or only for a few different days. We'll have to see because it's still early days. But that is another kind of challenge that buyers are gonna have, is that they will be forced to have to sign something if they wanna go look at a home. The third thing that's gonna kind of change for buyers is that buyers might be more inclined to just go directly with the listing agent. They might just say, hey, you know what? I don't have an agent because I never signed a buyer's rep agreement. They see a property and they talk to the listing agent who's representing the seller and says, hey, you know what? I'll just work with you. You represent me as well. And we can just get this deal done, which you can do. But I would highly, highly, highly suggest that you don't do that. And there's a couple reasons why. The one and major one is that listing agent is representing the seller. Their fiduciary duty is to the seller. And what is their job? To make sure that they get the highest price with the best terms for the seller. And if you're having that person represent you, generally a buyer's agent's job is to get you the lowest price with the best terms possible. So there's a conflict of interest. And that seller's agent has a fiduciary duty to the seller, not to you. You're just some Joe Schmo that walked through. So they may not be looking out in your best interest. They may just say, yeah, sign this document, we can get the deal done. But are they gonna be looking out for you in regards to inspections? Or are they just gonna say, oh, that's not a big deal, don't worry about it? Are they gonna find you the best contractors when you need to get quotes to maybe ask for credit? They might get the cheapest guy who does a bad job, and then when they actually go to do the work, it actually is more expensive and they don't even do a good job. So there's lots of things that could happen. Or maybe there's condo documents that need to be reviewed and there's a special assessment that's hiding in there and you don't know how to read them, but the seller's agent's not really gonna tell you much because they represent the seller, not you. But at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, you could represent yourself selling the home. You could also represent yourself in court. But would it be in your best interest if you were in divorce court and you were divorcing your husband or wife or significant other and you decided to hire their attorney? Would that be in your best interest? Probably not. And this is the exact situation that could come up if you hire the listing agent to represent you as well as the seller. So just keep that in mind. Now, how is this going to affect sellers? Well, honestly, not that much has changed. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around why this even was put into place, because as I discussed earlier, commissions have always been negotiable. Nothing has really changed. And sellers have always had the option to not pay a cooperating agreement. That was just something that had to be discussed. But now, because of all the bad information that's out there, there might be certain agents who will steer their sellers from saying, yeah, you don't have to pay a co-op, but I think it's gonna have negative impact on how much money that seller actually puts in their pocket. They're thinking on the front end, oh, I don't have to pay the buyer's commission, okay, I'm gonna make more money. But at the end of the day, you're going to dilute the amount of buyers who actually show up, because not all buyers are gonna be able to pay down payment, closing costs, and pay their buyer's agent. So they're just gonna say, hey, you know what? I'm not gonna put an offer on your property because you're not gonna pay my buyer's agent. So if there are 4 properties on the market and 3 of them are willing to pay a cooperating or a buyer's agent, and 1 is not, this seller who says, no, I'm not gonna pay a buyer's agent, but that buyer and many others say, I don't wanna pay the buyer's agent, which property are they gonna go with? Probably one of these 3. So what's gonna happen? Well, you're gonna have less buyers going to this property, you're gonna have less buyers giving you a high price, and you're probably gonna see that price go down. So it's not really that beneficial. You could test it, you could try it, you could try to negotiate it. But I am talking to my sellers and explaining to them, hey, if 30 to 40% of the buyers out here in Hawaii are VA and they're not even allowed to pay for their compensation for the buyer's agent, if you don't offer anything, you're completely cutting out those buyers. And additionally, there's a lot of other buyers out there who don't want to pay the buyer's agent because they have to pay for down payment, for closing costs, and all of those different things that come together. So adding that other extra fee, they'll probably pass on your home and go with one that is offering it. So if you wanna be competitive and you wanna get the highest price, that means you need to get the most buyers into your property so you can push the price up. They can finance anything that's needed other than the buyer's compensation. So it's very important. I'm telling my sellers it's in your best interest to offer some sort of compensation for the buyer's agent so we can get as many buyers in here and drive the price up. Okay, now for the part you've all been waiting for, what is my opinion? Now, obviously I'm biased, I'm a real estate agent, but I'm also a buyer and a seller as well. I understand both sides of it, but I think there's gonna be a lot of changes that could be beneficial and not so much, but let's quickly go through them. The first one, like I mentioned before, I think a lot of VA buyers might get hurt by this. The VA is talking about possibly changing the guidelines so that VA can actually pay for their buyer's agent, but most service members don't have a bunch of chunk of change to pay for down payment. Hopefully they use the VA loan, 0 down. I've got plenty of videos that explain the benefits of that, but they still have to pay closing costs. And a lot of them are working for our country and are not getting paid a lot of money, so they don't have a lot of savings to also pay for a buyer's agent. So even if the VA changes their guidelines, you're going to narrow a large pool of buyers, and it's really gonna hurt, I believe, VA buyers if this law goes into effect and the VA doesn't change their guidelines. Second thing is, honestly, I think it's a silly law and I think it's not going to help anybody. really, it's not really gonna be helping sellers. It's just gonna make it more complicated and a slower process for them, because now it's not transparent to what the payout or the compensation is. Even if it's only $1, like let buyer's agents know so that you don't have to open up your house to somebody who comes through and maybe an agent didn't call and ask and they say, oh yeah, we're only giving $1 for compensation. Well, that buyer's not gonna wanna pay it. So you just had somebody go through your house who can't even afford to buy the house anymore. And additionally, listing agents are gonna have to pick up their phone every single day to tell people what the compensation is. And it's gonna be very slow and very ugly for, I believe, the seller, as well as for the buyer, listing agent, and buyer's agent. Third thing is, I think that it's gonna make the home buying process less transparent. They were trying to make this more transparent. That was the theme that they're using. This is more transparent for the seller, who understands how the commission structure is, who's getting paid out what, and who's paying who. But this is actually making it less transparent, because now you can't even see what the payout is. So you have to call and ask, and once again, that listing agent might just lie. They could make any number up. They should ethically say what they agreed upon in the listing agreement, but who knows what they might say to you. Next thing, like I mentioned before, I think this is gonna create a lot more litigation. I think we're gonna have litigation with the fair housing. I think that there's gonna be fair housing issues with VA, with people offering different compensations for different types of buyers. And all in all, just gonna create a lot of litigation when it comes to the fair housing. I think we're also gonna see most likely a spike in litigation when it comes to dual agency. That's when you have the listing agent representing the buyer and the seller. I think this change is going to maybe push buyers more in the idea of, oh, I'll just go directly to the listing agent because they can represent me and I don't have to sign a buyer's rep agreement. But once again, like I discussed earlier, that listing agent has a fiduciary duty to do their best to get the highest and best terms for their seller, not for you. So I think that there's gonna be more litigation after transactions where that listing agent's gonna get sued when they agreed to do a dual agency and represent a buyer as well, because they're not really looking out in that buyer's best interest. And lastly, I think this may slow down the market a little bit, because if you have already high interest rates, which has already slowed down the amount of buyers and already made it very difficult to buy a house. And now sellers think, oh, you know what? I don't have to pay a buyer's agent, which is going to dwindle down that buyer pool even smaller. Well, you're gonna have less buyers going to the property, which means that the prices are not gonna go up. They might sell at asking, or those properties might sit for a while, which will create more inventory. So it depends on what side of the fence. We'll just have to see. Time will tell if this has any effect for buyers, sellers, for the real estate market as a whole. But in my professional opinion, I think this is just going to create inefficiencies. It's going to create a messier process. It's going to make it more difficult for buyers to buy homes. And it's going to create this false narrative for sellers that they can sell their home for basically no commission to the buyer's agent, when I think they will soon find out that that will not give them the competitive edge that they're looking for if they want to sell their property for top dollar. So anyways, guys, that was a lot of information to unpack. I hope that was helpful. I want to know your opinion. What do you think? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is this going to save everybody lots of money? Is it going to create more issues for buyers, for sellers, for agents? What is your opinion? Put them in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear them. Even if it's hate speech, throw it at me. I would love to know it. I'm a real estate agent. I'm sure you guys have plenty of opinions for me, whether you like me or hate me. So put it in the comment section down below. Love to hear from you. And also, if you got any value out of this video, make sure you smash that like button, as well as click the subscribe and notification bell so you get notified whenever I drop videos just like this. And lastly, if you want to talk about real estate, feel free to reach out to me. I got some boots on the ground. Got my contact information right here, or you can directly DM me on any of my social media platforms. With that being said, I'm Patrick with PatrickLongRealty.com, powered by eXp Realty. Hope you have a beautiful day. I'll talk to you soon. Aloha.